it can't be done with the current legal framework, so we're going to have to envisage a different, much simpler framework, which starts over time to reinvigorate, re-energize people, so then we can stop becoming slaves that are simply going to work in order to put food on the table and behaving as almost a cog in a machine at work.
It's not just in the Bible where some of these concepts were explored. I mean, if you look at parish councils that existed and at one point offered social security, it's archaic social security by modern standards, but also there were guilds of freemen who built significant parts of many of the major cities. So these sorts of trusts have existed in the past.
It's important to understand that this is not anti-aspirational. People have ownership of it. It's not a kind of a radical political alternative. It's not really a political model at all. It's just good sense economics to develop local communities from which it can grow out.
The Bible.
The Manna Journey is the catalyst for change in our world. It's a consistent source of truth for the next generation and current leaders. Our mission is to change the world by reframing our current governance, by using ancient wisdom to solve modern problems, and by shaping innovative new businesses to have a culture of pursuit of purpose.
Is the law working for modern society, and is the Bible the place to look for how we can redesign our legal system? Well, Philip Ullman thinks we can learn from the Bible, and this is part of the Manna Journey, a series that looks at how we can bring more Bible study and more understanding into our modern everyday life. I'm joined, of course, by Philip Ullman, but also by Harvey Bolofsky, who is the Emeritus Rabbi of the Golders Green Synagogue. Harvey, welcome. Philip, welcome. So, Philip, you've had some problems and experiences in your business career related to how complex the law is and how divorced it is from really, what modern life should be like.
There are many examples of the complexity of the law which doesn't protect people and unfortunately results in death. A classic example is the whole field of intellectual property, where we protect the interests of the chemical company that's developed a drug which could be life-saving, which could save thousands or millions of lives, but money's been invested, so we say the shareholder's entitled to get a return on their investment, and therefore we restrict the use of a drug that can save lives because of a complex legal system which protects the investor, which is crazy. So we don't actually look after people, and it results in death.
But that creates a bigger question, doesn't it? Because once again, that's the idea that rights are the most important thing, whereas responsibility is much more emphasized in the Bible.
Absolutely right. Yes. So the Bible has no examples of rights, because rights are about me and about me having to enforce those rights against you. And that's going to result in an escalation and a conflict. And the Bible doesn't want conflict. It wants peace. And therefore it says, look, everyone has duties and obligations, and those are met by de-escalation of disputes, by conflict resolutions, whereby you work together in a simple, distributed way, and you try to make peace between people, and you get them to talk to each other, and you involve more and more people in a mediation process. So again, any cases of rights is going to escalate into a fight, which is escalating into disputes, which unfortunately results in the loss of life. I mean, another big example is health inequality. We have immensely complicated systems, and you look at people living in different areas. They could be living 20 miles apart, but the life expectancy in one area can be 15 years, 20 years different to another area. Isn't that murder? Doesn't that mean that people are living 15 years less because the system is not protects them? They don't understand the law. They're not educated to understand how to look after their health, how to protect themselves, and then they end up living 15 years shorter. So wherever you look, the complex legal system without a true simple narrative costs life.
But it's amazing that you talk about drug companies, because I think that is a really good example, because it is a life and death situation, and you look at the mindset of these companies when it comes to, say, HIV drugs for Africa or that sort of thing. I just wonder whether, if we changed the system and made it much more about responsibility, much more biblical, whether those CEOs, just by nature of being in that environment, would understand their role as, well, you call it trustee, but as somebody who's there to protect the public rather than maximise profits.
I think they'd love it. I mean, because it's not a nice place to be a ruthless businessman, and many of them are isolated. They're living on gated estates by themselves and on a yacht by themselves. So they may have a yacht, but do they have healthy relationships? The answer is no. So it's a question of giving them role models, people who actually live that kind of life, and they start to see there is another way, there's another narrative, and they would love it. There's no question. I'm not saying that they have to be poor. I'm saying that they're trustees. And a good trustee is rewarded by more to be entrusted with them. So, but they have to recognise that they're looking after other people. And I think another example which comes to mind is Facebook and reports that the film, was it Social Dilemma, I think was the name of the film, where you start to see that work has actually been done, where Facebook started to realise that unfortunately many young ladies were upset with their appearance and were self-harming, and they look at the level of suicides amongst young women, young men, and they realised that the way they'd actually designed the technology was to create clicks, which means that people were addicted to their phones, which means that the people started to spend their time on phones and not communicating with each other. So you have law which should be simple and should lives, but these organisations continued to behave and still continue to behave in a way then they know they're actually creating addiction, creating a loss of life, but the system is complicated and they can't change it.
So Harvey, how can we start to change the law today to make it more similar to the Bible?
If we go back to the Joseph story, we'll remember that he proposed as a famine management plan to put custodians in place in local areas. This is the beginning of a local responsibility, what you might call today a civic trust, in which local resources are put together to enable businesses to thrive in order to look after local interests. It can be done quite on a small scale, and one can have a group of nested things. So there are local things and perhaps slightly larger, covering a slightly larger area, but again a sense that it's a collaborative effort to look at local resources and to ensure that local communities are resourced and don't get left behind. This is a beginning of a conversation, and I think I'm going to pass to Philip.
Yeah, I completely agree that civic trust, which is something that we've worked on together with Lord Glassman and developed the idea, is part of it. But you have to start at the high level by telling the story. It's about narrative. We have to paint a picture of a new society where organizations are distributed, where you have self-managing teams with people who are able to come to work and express their views and bring their whole selves to work, where their purpose is effectively to look after each other, to build relationships. And then you look at what framework. It requires a fall. It can't be done with the current legal framework, so we're going to have to envisage a different, much simpler framework, which starts over time to reinvigorate, re-energize people, so they stop becoming slaves that are simply going to work in order to put food on the table and behaving as almost a cog in a machine at work, where workplaces start to become soulful, where people can actually make decisions, where you have smaller teams. So we have to paint a picture of a different model with a higher level of consciousness for people and for the planet. And we have role models, and we can start experimenting. You don't go big bang on everywhere in 1 minute. You have to start experimenting in a number of different cities where you would create organizations, you'd rebuild a community, you would start to create model organizations. And once you see a city being reinvigorated, coming back to life, other cities will emulate it, and you start to get the whole model.
So suppose with a civic trust, that's an example of something that can be done now, which would illustrate a world that would be significantly better if we went to a legal framework that made all of this possible.
Yes, but it's not one civic trust. It would have to be a city.
Oh, yes.
It would have to be a complete move away from the concept of I can do whatever I want and make as much money as I want to I'm a trustee as part of a civic trust, which is locally accountable to a local community organisation, which is representative of the city, and with distributed responsibilities, which is central to the concept of civic trust. Yeah, but it would have to be a part of a state-sponsored, complete change of the whole area. It's not going to be one organisation that does it. It has to be, but you could do it in a few thousand people in an area, or maybe even Grimsby, where Morris. Start small. You have to start
small with a small group of people with a very specific objective to find the investment infrastructure to talk about rebuilding communities, and effectively based on covenantal principles where people are looking out for each other, where there's no easy out, where it's not about one but it's about the collective, and so on. It's important to understand that this is not anti-aspirational. People have ownership of it. It's not a kind of a radical political alternative. It's not really a political model at all. It's just good sense economics to develop local communities from which it can grow out.
The Bible is crystal clear in a couple of places, Exodus 24 and I think Deuteronomy 7, where it actually says don't do it too quickly, do it slowly, piece by piece. Otherwise you have hyosaurs, wild animals that will fill the fields. The Bible is conscious that you can't make change. Don't create a vacuum, because vacuums are filled in ways that we don't want it to be filled.
But it's funny that, you know, when you talk about these and think about these things, it's not just in the Bible where some of these concepts were explored. I mean, if you look at parish councils that existed and at one point offered social security, it's archaic social security by modern standards, but also there were guilds of freemen who built significant parts of many of the major cities. So these sorts of trusts have existed in the past, and even down to William Lever and Port Sunlight when Unilever built their own accommodation.
I'm very surprised if many of these had not been based on the same principle, people thinking about it the same way, perhaps reading from a slightly different perspective. They will have identified underlying governing principles on which they will have put together these constructs.
Start with 10 different examples, samples to prove the concept, to prove how it works, and then the thing will just escalate and become commonplace. But you have to start with a number of examples on a smaller scale.